Good morning and welcome to Trial Talk Live. This morning we've had a change in speaker. And so today Kelly Noel will be talking about variegated plants. Foliage comes in many shades of green, pure green, and then there are several shades of each of the purple greens, the blue greens, and then we have the light greens, and we have the spring green, which is my favorite color of green. Kelly Noel is retired to the garden after 35 years of teaching math, getting from a discipline where there was always only one right answer to one where there's no right answers, and we just learn more and more every day. She has volunteered with Master Gardeners of Ottawa-Carleton for almost 20 years. Over to you, Kelly.
Thank you, Candace. When I decided that I would, talk about variegation, I thought that maybe I had better learn more. I thought I can't just show you a bunch of pictures of pretty plants that I like. So I got busy on my computer looking up at what causes it, why does it happen, and so on. And I was quite interested to see that there are many opinions. There was references to that it was genetic, and then there were some that were called oddities, freaks, mutants, or sports, that there were diseases. So I was quite puzzled about this. So I've actually learned, I hope you're going to learn something today too. And I learned quite a bit in making this preparation. This is an example of genetic variegation. This is a Maranta, a prayer plant, and they are highly patterned and in symmetric patterns, and this is passed on. Not every single prayer plant has an identical pattern, but they are all very, very, very similar. And this is definitely genetic. There's the aloe vera. This also, this sometimes called zebra plant and various other things, that's in its genes. That's the way the pattern is, and that's what happens. The crotons, or the codiaeum, have many, 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 many colors. This is what makes them so popular as host plants. And coleus also, which we use as an annual. It both can be grown from seed, and you will get a variegated result. It won't be identical to the parent, but it will be variegation. It is passed on through the genes. And here's another one. This is actually one of my favorites. It's an annual here. It's a Euphorbia marginata, or they call it snow on the mountain, or various things. And it also comes true from seed. Very easy to grow. And it's a very, very fresh looking green and white. And you can see that it's a relative of the poinsettia, because those white and green with a little green stripe, those are actually leaves. And the flower is this little business in the middle. Now, the other kind of variegation, or another kind of variegation, is chimeral. And now, in Greek mythology, there was this creature, which was a she monster that had the head of a lion and the body of a goat, and apparently the head of a goat too, and the tail of a serpent, obviously made up of things that do not have the same genetic makeup. Now, the modern definition of a chimera is that it is an organism that contains cells that have different chromosomal makeup. So this hosta, I'm going to use hostas here as an example, because they have a great tendency to have this kind of variegation. It is spontaneous. It occurs, most hostas in the wild are green, and there will be ones that show some variegation, and often they don't survive, because that's the downside of this kind of variegation. The leaves are not the whole surface of the leaf will be able to feed the plant because of the lack of chlorophyll, and they're often weak and they don't survive. But plant hunters find these and keep them and propagate them, and we like them. Now, what happens here is that there's a defect. Somehow a defect occurs in the meristem. That's the area of the plant where the different kinds of cells are produced. Some will be leaf cells, some will be stem cells, some will be for the flower buds, and so on. and a defect happens, and it produces cells that cannot make chlorophyll and other cells that can. So the areas with no or reduced chlorophyll will allow other pigments to show through if there are other pigments there, or they might be white or cream or yellow or shades of green. Some plants will show some pink, some red, orange. Hostas don't usually do that, not that I've ever seen anyway. So these cells of different colors, the white cells here and the green cells here, do not have the same chromosomal makeup. So these plants are what they call chimeras. Now, this is not passed on through the genes. You can get seedlings from plants, like hostas for sure, and the variegation is not inherited. Now, some of the seedlings may show some variegation because there is a tendency for this plant to do that. And also there is some influence from the mother plant, the pod plant, that is transferred through the chloroplasts, only comes from the mother, the plant that bears the pod. So they do have some variegation in the seedlings, possibly. So they look for interesting patterns. They see what they get, and they keep the ones they like. What happens also is that you can have a green plant happily growing, and suddenly, spontaneously, a leaf forms that is a different color, that has some variegation. And when that happens, this is called a sport. And if it looks strong enough, if it looks like it can survive, most of these would not survive. This hosta at the bottom with all that white would not survive in the wild. It only survives where we can look after it and give it the food and all that, whatever that it needs. But this one at the top is hosta patriot with a green center and the white stripe. And this hosta here is called fire and ice, which puzzles me because there's no red for the fire. But anyway, fire and ice. And it is reversed. It has the white center and the green edge. So I looked at this one and I got all the way back to a all green hosta called Fortunii that is just plain green. And then from that, they got a sport, probably several sports that had a very tiny white margin. So that was Fortunii albomarginata. And some with an Oreo, a yellow edge too, but I'm talking here about the one with the white. And then a very popular hosta called Francie was a sport of the Fortunii albomarginata. And then Patriot, this Patriot up here, that was a sport of Francie. And then Fire and Ice was a sport of Patriot. Now, to me, when I looked at the whole sequence, this sport, I mean, this is very different, but all the others, the edge kept getting a little wider. And the interesting thing to me too was that the maximum expected size kept getting a little smaller. So the Fortunii had a spread of, I think it said 50 inches, and the albomarginata was like 40 inches. And then the Francie was down to 36 inches expected. And Patriot, I can't remember, but Fire and Ice is expected to be about 1.5 feet. And this one is a picture from one in my old garden, and that's about right. It did not get huge at all. Now, you can also get what they call reversions. This is a dogwood. I took this picture the other day outside a restaurant. This is, I think, dogwood Cornus alba. But what particular, whether it's elegantissima or whatever, I don't know. But these are actually dogwood leaves, and I peered underneath to see whether it was from a seed or whether it was attached to the stem, and it's from the stem. And clearly these are very green, all green leaves. So this is what they call a reversion. It's going back to all green, and basically it should be removed. It isn't very clear in the picture I took that these green leaves are bigger, definitely bigger than all of the other green and white leaves, because that's what happens. They have all lots more surface to feed the plant. They get stronger and bigger. And eventually this will turn mostly green if they don't cut that out. I remember there was, maybe still is, a Norway maple, Harlequin maple on Alta Vista that I used to drive by all the time. The Harlequin maple is the one with the green leaves and the white edge all around. Very striking, except for the fact that it's a Norway maple. And I saw as I drove by one year, one green branch. Yeah, it's quite high up. It's a big tree. By the next year, it was bigger branch. And by the last time I saw this, is probably about 10 years ago, and my route changed after that. About the whole third of that side of the tree was all green. And I was thinking the other day, I should go drive by and see if it's still there after the storm and see what color it is now. Anyway. This is the closest I came to something in my old garden. This is a Brunnera in behind, as you can see here, and these were green leaves that were bulging into the plant. And now it was not the least bit unusual to find green Brunneras underneath that were actually coming from seed. When the seed would drop, usually I would get green ones, and they were very easy to scoop up and transplant. But this was actually attached to the plant, this whatever it was. So, and here's a close-up of the leaf, and you can see, I thought I could see, well, there's a variegation here. It isn't all green. It's got this area of something going on. So I tried very carefully to preserve it. I did cut off, try to make a cutting of some of the leaves and left some of them there. Anyway, nothing happened. It didn't survive. The plant, the original green and white plant survived, but this, whatever, I didn't know whether it was a sport or a reversion, but I played with it. And then there are jumping genes. I thought, what? I've heard of jumping worms now, but jumping genes? This creates a different kind of variegation. And very interesting, what happens is that they were observing variegation that did seem to be inherited. Why was it inherited when it's not supposed to be? And this is Barbara McClintock. She was an American scientist. She actually won the Nobel Prize in 1983 for this discovery. But what she found was that there were little snippets of DNA that would transplant themselves, usually copy themselves onto another chromosome. This is virus-like activity, and they think that this is something that's left over from thousands of years ago from a benign virus of some sort that have planted this ability for some of these little mobile genetic elements to copy themselves onto another chromosome. And they figure that this activity, which happens in humans, they figure now about 45% of the human genome is actually composed of jumped genes. And of course, because this is happening at the chromosome level, it's inherited. And this is one of the reasons this McClintock, Dr. McClintock, was working with corn, Indian corn, and that's where she was observing that, like, this is inherited. This is not the ordinary kind of variegation that we've already talked about. Barbary. This is this kind of variegation. And of course, it is inheritable. And I guess their sort of more formal name, instead of jumping genes, are transposons. And then there's variegation caused by a virus. But I looked up hostavirus X. I'm sure everybody here who's listening has heard of hostavirus X. And, you know, I could not find anything up to date at all. I think the most recent thing I found was coming from around 2010. So you remember back around 2000 or 2005, like, that's all we were talking about was hostavirus X and how to avoid it and so on. But anyway, that's all the different ways. That's the end of the science lesson. Those are the different ways you can get variegation. So now I'm going to just show you some of my favorites. And here I'm back to the Brunnera. Everybody loves these little blue flowers in the spring. And this particular one is called Brunnera macrophylla variegata. When the variegata is cultivar name, you can count on it being produced, not natural, or it's something that happened. It's not the species. It happened and they cultivated and kept it. Way back at the beginning, I showed you an aloe. One of those was aloe variegata. And when the variegata is part of the botanical name, this indicates that something is naturally variegated. It isn't always the leaf, but something is variegated. That's what that means. This is another one that I really like. This is just a different kind of variegation, and I just adore these little blue flowers. Hakana Chloa, this Japanese hakone grass, as they call it, is absolutely gorgeous, and it takes a bit of shade, which is nice. It lights up. If you have a corner with a bit of shade, it lights it up. And then this is another euphorbia, and the bracts here are quite yellow. But I recently got this little one, and you can see it's quite a bit smaller. It has the same form, and it is making the same flowers. This is just a couple of days ago, so it really hasn't come into full bloom yet. But it has these variegated leaves, and I just, now I don't have a big garden anymore. I have a small garden, so I have all kinds of these little things that I like. This is a little epimedium with a little red edge, and it's very tiny, this one. Here it is. This is where it actually is located. And this is an Alchemilla mollis, which you're probably all familiar with, right there. And you see how tiny this little epimedium, this barrenwort, as they call it, snowy barrenwort. And then I'm getting this thing now for sedums that are just different colors. And I know sedum has a new name, which I've totally forgotten. Now I meant to write it down, but everybody still calls them sedum. This one's called lime twister. It's a ground cover. And again, this was taken a few days ago, and you can see that it has a few colors to offer. And this is another one of them that I just got last year for my little garden. It's called Firecracker. It has a bit of red with it, which I really like. Now, in my old garden, I had lots of lamium. Now, to me, lamium maculatum, this one is white Nancy, although there are no blooms on this one, was great as a ground cover. It did spread. I did not find the lamiums to be too aggressive. Easy to pull up if they got farther than you wanted, easy to transplant. And the white Nancy had this lovely white bloom, which I really liked. Here, there's a different lamium under some Solomon seal. This one, it was pink pewter with tiny little pink blossoms. And here it is also. This one is under a runcus, and just floated around underneath. They're very easy to control. But there is a mistake. This is lamiastrum. And don't buy this one unless you have a lot of room. I planted it here in the sun. There's another mistake in front. If you see, those are lily of the valley. But anyway, it took me quite a while to remove all of this from this area. But I did move the lamiastrum to. I had a long hedge with deep shade underneath, and so I thought, well, maybe I'll try it over there. So I did, and you can see here it is up in behind. And this is a hosta that was there. And this Campanula glomerata moved over to the left. And you can see all of the lamiastrum leaves coming all the way from back there forward, growing through everything. Anyway, not my best move. This is another one that I liked because it was a vine, and it had these pretty blue berries, which the birds liked. And it turns out when the Japanese beetle arrived in Ottawa, the Japanese beetle likes this. And they did feast on it a bit, but because it's so odd shapes and leaves and all, looks like it's all bitten and chewed up already. And with white marks on it. The Japanese beetles, their damage really didn't show, and it kept them off other things that I didn't want them to eat. And this is a big one. If I don't have it anymore, of course, because as I said, I have a small garden. This is variegated Japanese knotweed. It's not as aggressive as the all green. I didn't put its name here because it's have a few names: Fallopian japonica, Polygonum cuspidatum. It's knotweed, or fleece flower it's called, and it is big. The blossoms are interesting and very fragrant. I didn't have a picture of it in full blossom, but this is what happens. Now it did spread. Every year I would find underneath it a couple of little shoots like this, which I could scoop up and give to somebody with a warning, Now this is a combo I really liked in my old garden. That's fire and ice up in the corner, and then pulmonaria. For some reason or other, this was a very shady garden. And this is pulmonaria Sissinghurst Weiss. The flowers were white, and the foliage stayed quite fresh, not like a lot of pulmonarias that get quite dog-eared in the sun later. This was Hosta So Sweet. It had very incredibly fragrant white flowers. And there's an astilbe I see under here that probably was getting crowded out, and another pulmonaria. And this was the sweet woodruff with its little white flowers. That always pleased me, that site. And this is a vista from a friend's garden, but that really pleased my eye when I saw it. This is a dogwood with the golden edge. And this is Daphne Carol Mackey. And you see they have the same variegation, green center, gold edge, and which coordinated so nicely, but there's such a contrast between the two. And then there's one last thing I have. This is from my little garden I have right now. This is an astrantia that is variegated. This is a Heliopsis that is variegated. I won't count the heucheras because they're not really variegated, they're just other colors. And here's one I was going to say do not grow, and I still am saying do not grow, but it turns out that it is totally edible. It's called fish mint in a lot of Asian cultures, and people use it to you can eat it raw, you can eat it stewed, you can eat the stems, you can eat the roots. It's completely edible. So I figure put it in a pot instead. And it's actually kind of pretty. It's very tempting when you see it because of the red edges and the white and the pale green and the, but put it in a pot. Trust me on that. And here's my newest one that I'm getting. It's a symphytum. It's a comfrey. When I first saw the picture, I thought, oh, it's a hosta. And then I took a better look. So.
Great. Well, thanks for the presentation, Kelly. Reddy had a comment that people feel they've gotten all this new information now about variegation with the science behind it. And there's several questions and comments. Just a second here. A couple of things to point out also about names. Telephia,
no, telepha.
for some seedlings,
Yes.
in case you're looking for them, and also the virus that comes with tulips. Virus was mentioned as a cause of variegation. Causes a similar color streaking variegation.
Yes, and some of the viruses are benign. They do not kill the plant. It's not a lethal virus. It has an effect, but it's not a lethal thing, apparently.
Yeah. And well, since we were seeing all these beautiful hostas, variegated hostas, a question about keeping bugs away from eating them. Once we have those beautiful leaves, we don't want them to be damaged. Do you have any suggestions on that?
Oh, I have this policy of if anything really is too attractive to slugs or whatever, and it ends up in ribbons fairly quickly, I find a replacement and don't keep it. That's what ends up happening to them. Some of them, they are attacked by slugs, but you know, the slugs have to eat too, and the birds can eat the slugs maybe if they're whatever. So I just don't put them in my garden.
We just someone commenting that they've been looking for Pulmonaria Sissinghurst white. Is that would that fall into the category of variegation caused by some of those?
Yes, it's a as far as I could tell,
chimeral?
it's a chimera. It's very hard to pin this down. I discovered when I was trying to read my way through, you'll get differing information in different places. You can get all white, you can get, I should say, all green Pulmonaria. And I have had, in that garden that did have the Sissinghurst white, I did have seedlings crumb that were Pulmonaria, all green and with pink flowers, which I would then remove. So I'm pretty sure it's a chimera.
Okay. Well, it might be a harder one to find. I'm not familiar with it, so I guess keep looking or go to those plant sales. To,
yes.
Yeah. Are some question about if the variegations are made with using intentional genetic modification?
I did not, there's a mention of that, but like jumping genes does cause this, but no, it seems that by and large, they're serendipitous. Some plants spontaneously changes something, and if it looks good, if it seems it'll be strong enough, they keep it. Hosta breeders have quite a different process to follow than daylily breeders, I'll tell you that. I mean, hosta breeders aren't even interested in the flower, except for the fact that they can get seeds from it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I guess all hostas suffer from different types of leaf damage. With variegated leaves, someone is asking how to prevent the leaves from turning brown. Is it a question of watering?
I would imagine. I have a small garden now and easy to manage. I never had a problem with hostas turning brown, I have to say, even though I was not a big waterer, unless we were in very serious drought. So I would say that if you have that, then either you have very inhospitable soil or you do need to do some watering.
Another question about the hakone grass, the Japanese grass, soil to grow that in, moist versus dry. Is sun better than shade?
Well, it does take sun, but it will take some shade. And in fact, most of the best displays of it that I have seen are in a somewhat shady situation, like under a tree with a high canopy. So there's lots of sun can get underneath it, but it is in fact in shade a good some part of the day. It's just now it takes a while to establish. That picture wasn't my current Hakonakloa. My current one is quite a small little mound. It's only been planted 2 years now, and it will establish and get bigger. It's growing, but it's quite small. Takes a while.
Probably just have time for another, maybe one or two questions. One question is, are reversions, do they tend to be more vigorous than the variegated? I mean, the Persicaria, I guess, would be an example of, you had the Persicaria.
Oh my gosh. If you have an all green one, well, yes, it is very, very aggressive and very invasive. But yeah, if you get a reversion, you just cut it out, because if you don't, it will definitely take over. This is the downside of variegation, is that the plant is less efficient at making its own food. And plants are what they call autotrophs. They make their own food, generally speaking. And those that have lesser ability to do that, not going to do as well as those that do. I think that was one thing that made me was interesting, as that sports of the hosta kept getting smaller as the expected size kept getting smaller as the amount of surface that was not green increased. I thought that was interesting.
Well, that's all the time we have for questions. So I'm going to turn it back to Candace.
All right, well, thank you everyone for joining us. It was a very interesting conversation, Kelly. We're at 10 o'clock, so we'll see you all next week at Trial Talk Live.